Okay, following our discussion on context, I want to establish a definition of argument that should put everything we've discussed in perspective. Argument is the process of attaching claims to presuppositions. Think about that. Argument, the thing that we engage in every day, I'm making one right now, is the process of attaching our claims to our audience's presuppositions. And it is only when we do this effectively can we succeed in convincing or persuading another to believe in something or act in some kind of way. Naturally, this raises the question, how do we do this effectively? And the answer, of course, is complex, but we'll boil it down into a few steps, the first of which we already covered. That was context. The next thing to consider are the appeals. These are the three artistic proofs one can make to their audience. And they're considered artistic because they're a product of the person making the argument. It comes from within, and this contrasts with the inartistic proofs, which are things like photographs and fingerprints and DNA, things lawyers often call direct evidence. And when one makes an argument, they, in the process of making it, are appealing to their audience in these three ways, which of course we know are character, reason, and emotion. Ethos, logos, pathos. And in your analysis of how someone uses rhetoric, you must be able to describe how appeals are made and what ultimately comes as the result. If one appeals successfully to their intended audience, they have earned a measure of credibility, and you'll need to be able to explain why this is the case for the intended audience. If, as a result of using examples, I show myself to be informed and thereby reassure the audience, I'll need to put that out there expressly and connect the dots in a way that circles back to the presuppositions of the intended audience. If someone uses examples in an effort to make themselves appear more credible, to reassure the audience that they know what they're talking about, I need to be able to account for this with respect to my intended audience. So, for example, does my audience even care that I would cite authorities or examples? In order to substantiate my case, they would have to first acknowledge or accept or believe that somebody's argument should be based on these sorts of authorities before they could even find value in my use or citation of such sources. You'll need to be able to account for these sorts of things. Likewise, when discussing the emotional aspect of a claim, you'll want to discern the emotions that the author is trying to evoke and why they wouldn't stir or prompt this emotional response from the audience. To continue from our last example, if I'm using examples of pictures of starved children in order to advance the claim that you should donate to my organization in order to save the children, my goal is to foster a sense of pity. You, as an analyst, must not only identify that, but you also must note who is likely to feel what. In this case, people who are sympathetic, people who empathize with others who are in need, are likely to have this kind of emotion. And you'll have to connect these dots, not only what strategy is being used and what appeal is being made, but why this appeal would be successful in this context. Finally, when addressing the appeal to reason or intellect, you must account for how the claim connects specifically to underlying beliefs, which are called premises or assumptions. You can't, for example, say something like the argument appeals to logos because she uses facts to appeal to logos. This is a common mistake I see in the WPA all the time. That quote, which has been stated by many, is pure nonsense. It does not make sense. The statement contains both an error in definition and it's an error of reasoning. It's a fallacy called circular reasoning. Instead, when discussing this appeal to logos, you must break down the claim to reveal the underlying assumption on which the claim is based. Let's take a look at this example right here, just as a way to illustrate this point. The corporate income tax should be abolished because it encourages waste and high prices. So our claim is the corporate income tax should be abolished. The reason is it encourages high prices. Now, this argument here is based on an underlying assumption. This is a presupposition. It's a belief. It's a foundational belief, and it's the premise. Premise, belief, assumption, presupposition. I'm using these terms interchangeably. But in order for this claim to be valid for this reason, one must hold what belief? In this case, it would be things that encourage waste and high prices are bad or should be abolished. There's a few ways you could articulate this, but that's sufficient. Either one of them is good to go. Now, think about what I said just a moment ago. In order for this claim to be valid for this reason, one must assume or presuppose this. This is the assumption on which the claim is based, and it is this that you want to contend with in your analysis. In order for the appeal to logos to be effective, one must presuppose, that is one, when I say one, the intended audience must presuppose or hold the belief that things that encourage waste and high prices should be abolished. If they do not, this will be much more tricky. They'll have to do a lot more work into changing that belief before they can even make this claim. And that's what you want to contend with in these readings. When we talk about who is it effective for, that is a consideration of audience. And likewise, people of the audience that might not find it compelling. Now, as a final note, I want to emphasize this one point. It's a common mistake to think of logos alone as logical, and ethos and pathos as non-logical or irrational. All the appeals have a logical dimension, even the emotional one. The ethos appeal, for example, arises if reasons for trust have been presented, and trust is a form of pathos. And likewise, pathos appears if reason for emotion has been presented. We can speak of a reasonable emotion, and that can change how a person feels by showing that the perceived causes for his or her emotion are mistaken. Kind of like what happens in cases of PTSD, where someone may feel threatened despite safe surroundings. And so these are the things that you must determine before you can conclude on whether an argument is convincing. Okay, the last thing we need to do is address how these appeals are made, which actually occurs a step before the appeals, because appeals can't be used. I repeat, the appeals cannot be used. They are made, and they are made by our use of rhetorical strategies. Rhetorical strategies, of course, are techniques of communication that we employ in our effort to be understood and to make our points. And it's through this vehicle we make the appeals, using a narrative or definition or examples. I make appeals to ethos and logos and pathos. I do not use ethos. The same goes with all the other appeals. I do not logos you. I do not use logos because I use facts or statistics. All of these statements are nonsense. They mean nothing. They're gibberish. This is a critical error, so make sure you account for this detail in your analysis. Okay, that's it for this video. We reviewed the appeals and strategies, and we're going to turn now to a short example that I hope will illustrate the use of this model or these models and will prepare you for your own application in this assignment.